In this video, we're going to take a look at Dr. P.H. Martin's Ocean Blue. Let's jump straight to the end with my opinion on this ink. I expected a bit of a turquoise lean that thankfully wasn't there. I kind of expected that because it's an ocean blue, and frequently those have a bit of a turquoise with them. This is a good blue from a brand people don't even bother to look at in the fountain pen community. And it's understandable why. This is the only ink I can find from them currently that is a fountain pen ink. I've almost used up the bottle of this, and I've enjoyed it the entire time. I do hope that they start to make some more fountain pen inks and that people pay some attention to them, because here is an unsung brand that it's performed very well. It's been very well behaved in the pen. It is very inexpensive to get a hold of. That makes it a real winner for a lot of people in what they're going to look at in inks. And let's be frank, there's no shortage of people making inks, so another manufacturer out there doesn't hurt us in any kind of way. I hope they do a little bit more than dip their pinky toe into this and maybe go for a little bit more. I like to change things up by using a different pen each day. Today that pen is an Aurora Optima with a broad nib. It's inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. To see how I arrived at that opinion, let's take a look at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine. The fine has no feather and no spread. It is offering little spots of shading, like on the L of Dooley or the lower part of the Y in Dooley. Built at the top part of the letters has some darker areas. So it's a nice, darker, vivid blue, but it gets to much darker areas, providing some decent shading. Where the medium is a wetter pen, and so it puts down much more ink. And with that, it is a much darker tone. It has no feather and no spread and no shading whatsoever here, but I really like the vivid tone we're getting. The stub is just a little bit lighter in tone than the medium, with no feather, no spread, no shading, still very nice tone on the page. Looking at the back, we see that we get no bleeding and no ghosting. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a TWSBI Vac Mini with a fine nib, a Parker Jotter with a medium nib, a Pilot Custom 912 with a music nib, The next writing sample is done on Leuchtterm 1917 paper. The fine has no feather, no spread, a couple of moments of shading where I went back over, like on the L of circle or my E's that are always especially closed up. I'm just horrible at doing them. That weird spot on the G of algebraic, that was me, where I paused the pen in place for a little bit, and on most papers that'll cause a little bit of an issue. So that was more of a user error than anything else. The medium being a little bit wetter than that fine, it's a darker tone. It has no feather and no spread and no shading whatsoever. It still comes across with this tone paper as a nice vivid tone. The stub is about the same tone as that medium, with no feather, no spread, but a few moments of shading that happen, like the E in time or the N in Ben. Very good in what we're seeing here. Get a minor bit of ghosting, not something to be concerned about, and no bleed whatsoever. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The next writing sample is done on Moleskine paper. Here, the fine is giving us no feather, no spread. It is still giving us little spots of shading. We see in these, we see in 3, in problems, in different. We see a lot of areas where there's some decent shading popping up, which is very nice, especially on a paper that doesn't typically give us much in shading. Darker than the fine, with no feather, no spread. We have no shading that's coming on here, which is more because the pen itself is a bit wetter. The music nib has tiny feathering in certain areas, like the LE of trouble or the N in even, proving the G is giving some tiny feathers. I don't see the feathering as the biggest deal to stop someone from using it, but it is there. We have no spread and minor spots of shading that are coming through with this, which is nice. Looking at the back of the page, we get only the tiniest bit of show through or ghosting and no bleeding at all. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. This smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. And here we see the results of the resistance test. The next writing sample is done in a composition notebook. The fine has no feather, no spread, shading not as nice as on some of the other papers, but still giving us some very nice shading, some very nice attitude, maybe we'll start to call it, in some of the writing. I do like seeing those darker spots that show up. They always seem to draw my attention towards particular words. Medium is darker than the fine with no feather, no spread. On this paper, we're getting tiny spots of shading that are occurring more in that they're a bit lighter than some of the other areas. Like the O in lowest is a little bit lighter in tone. In such, from the C to the H, it gets a little bit lighter in between. Now we see some of these lighter areas occur ever so slightly, only a few. But I'm going to say it has some shading. The music nib has no feather, no spread, the same tone as the medium. Very nice in performance. I don't know what else to say for that. No real shading. Looking at the back of the page, as normal with this paper, there's a tiny bit of ghosting that is occurring and no bleeding at all. With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at some color comparables. Here is Diamine Sapphire Blue. Here is Geherbin Eclat de Saphir. Here is Monteverde Document Blue. Here is Pilot Cerulean Blue. The next writing sample is done in a Mead 5-star notebook. The fine has no feather and no spread, and only a couple of spots that shade, like in substituting, the first T is a little bit darker at the top, or that is a bit darker than the word be or the word odd. It's got no feather, no spread, very nice. The medium is darker than the fine. It has tiny featherings that occur like in the word transposing. But those feathers are very small. You can see it on the S or on the P. You see a tiny bit of feathering at the bottom of the word equals, but none of the feathering that's here is any kind of real problem for your writing. It gives no shading here, much more an issue for the paper than the ink itself. The music nib, I expected much more feathering based on what I saw with the medium, but the music is giving us no feathering, no spread, and no shading at all. shows us a very light ghosting, and we get no bleeding, so we don't corrupt any other pages. While it's nice to find other inks in the same color family, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Here is a gray ink by Diatramentis, their Silver Gray. Here is a pink ink by Robert Oster, their Cherry Blossom. Here is an orange ink by Monteverde, their Mandarin Orange. Here is a red ink by Diamine, their Poppy Red. If you'd prefer different complement colors, then there's links to those different playlists down in the description. Or you can click on my face. That'll take you to my channel page. Then click on the playlist tab. Scrolling down, you'll be able to see all of the playlists that are here on the channel. The last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper. The fine experiences a tiny bit of spread, but not enough that I would have any real concern over. It goes from a fine to like a medium fine, so not such a big deal. We have no feathering going on, which is awesome. We do not have any shading here, but again, I don't see that as really being an issue with this particular paper. I think the blue is still holding its vibrancy very well. Medium is much darker than the fine. Now there are a couple feather spots that occur, like when you're looking at the word possible. There's tiny feathering throughout all of that. But the word already does not have any feathering. The word no has some spread, but the word odd only has a little bit of spread. So it does spread with the medium, but not tons, and it's kind of inconsistent, like the making of this paper. The music nib is the same tone as the medium. It has feathering. When you look at the word equivalent, you see quite a bit of tiny feathers all over it. Another has a bunch of tiny feathers all over it. It is slightly spread, but since it's such a wide nib, it doesn't make to be the biggest of issues. And there's absolutely no shading whatsoever. When we look at the back of the page, we get some minor ghosting that's going on, and there is no bleed through that touches the back of the page. Even though there's a couple spots that look like it might, nothing does. So this is great for cheap paper. So what nib and pen do I think is going to give the best writing experience with this ink? It does have a general lighter tone and shading in the finer pens with a medium flow. It's really very nice to look at. Now, I like the vibrancy that it's giving in a wet stub or a wet broad nib, even though to get that, I have to sacrifice the shading. So it comes down to, would I like it to be a bit lighter with some spots of shading, which I can enjoy a lot, or do I want a darker yet more vivid tone from a wet broad or stub? And in that case, it's making a choice of which you prefer to write with on a day. Now, if I was making a general assumption of which one to go with, I would probably go with a wet stub more frequently than a medium flow fine. But both would be great options for this ink. Thanks for watching.